Greetings and welcome to a special episode of Morrowind Modding Showcases looking at Wizard's Island, Scourge of the Frostbringer. As always, I'm your host, Dark Elf Guy, and today we're going to be looking at one of the largest finished landmass mods for Morrowind, Wizard's Island, an old classic that ranks well up there in terms of quality content. Released around 2004 to 2005 by the Wizard's Island team, this mod featured 2 large landmasses, dozens of quests including 1 epic story, and several massive dungeons, and a complete soundtrack with over an hour of unique music to listen to. Often considered one of the best content mods released from Morrowind, we're finally getting around to showcasing it today, years after we first launched the Morrowind Modding Showcases YouTube channel, and I can only hope that we do this great mod service here. Of course, before we get started, you can find download links down in the video description below, including download links for the Tower Rebuild compatibility patch, and you'll find an annotation to the Wizard's Island's launch trailer in the upper left hand corner here. Anyway, moving on to the actual showcase here, this mod starts out when you're awoken from slumber by a ghostly spirit, or well, perhaps, spirit isn't exactly the right word, because this is more like a ghostly projection that a far-off wizard is using to communicate with you. Apparently, he has a quest for you to do. He needs an enchanted diamond in order to teleport to Wintervale, but he can't get it by himself, so he needs you to acquire it, which involves buying it from a merchant in Tel Brenora, and eventually you'll get passage via a ghostly ship and skeleton crew to take you to the wizard himself, but more about that in a moment. First things first, I do want to spend just a bit of time taking a look at the map here. I'm using the Tower Rebuild compatibility version of Wizard's Island, which locates both major islands to the northern part of the map. You can see one of them is above Solstein, and the other one is above where the eastern portion of Tower Rebuild is, away from any conflicts, with the mainland. There may still be a few other landmass conflicts though, so just keep that in mind. Just remember to take a look at your in-game map before installing this mod. And going back to the rest of the mod here, the first island you're going to arrive at is the secret island of the wizard that originally contacted you back on Wintervale. It's a fairly sizable landmass, of peaceful woodland, small rivers, a fairly sizable lake and mountain, and really not that much else, honestly. This island is only, home to about 3 or 4 dungeons, plus the manor house of the wizard that contacted you. This is where the main quest for Wizard's Island really, kinda starts, as pretty much as soon as you arrive, your good friend is getting killed by the summoned minions of some ancient foe named Ged, the archetype villain of Wizard's Island, and who has placed a curse on a distant land home to the city of Wintervale, which we'll get to later on. But anyway, you're forced to watch as your friend is murdered, and there's really not much you can do about it, at least not yet. But before we get to the rest of this quest here, I would like to spend just a bit of time touring this first island you come across, as it's a fairly nice looking place with some interesting sights to see, if also a bit dated in the landscaping department just a bit. As I mentioned before, there's a number of woodlands, small rivers and lakes on the island for you to explore, most of which are home to simple woodland creatures like deer, giant moths, small butterflies, and other simple critters. The forests here are rather detailed and provide a lovely backdrop for some, woodland hiking, which you'll need to do for the main quest later on. But again, there's not really a whole lot on this island content-wise, just a few dungeons and the one house. Really, this first island is sort of meant as a demo island to showcase what you can expect from Wizard's Island, but the vast majority of the content is further along in the main quest, as we'll get to eventually. And in any event, before you can continue the main quest, you'll need to investigate the wizard's house, looking for any secrets or hints he may have left behind about what he was doing out here. Now, I forgot to mention this before, but you'll notice that all the music we're using in the background here is actually from the Wizard's Island soundtrack, including some of the unique music used for the manor interior here. We're going to be using primarily Wizard Island music for pretty much the entire episode, and there's a ton of great tracks to listen to, so that's one more reason to give this mod a try. It contains just so much great music. I believe the composer for this, and I know I'm going to butcher his name here, is Untitled Chapter, I want to say. I'm pretty sure I screwed up the pronunciation there, but he's done a lot of great music for both Wizard's Island and also Valdian, which also came with a bit of a unique soundtrack. And anyway, getting back to the showcase here, you'll eventually find a journal along with a key to a nearby mine, where the wizard was trying to harvest ebony for an experiment. Now, there's a fair bit of dungeon delving involved before you can get to the main island here, and this first intro section will probably take you several hours to get through, unless you're, rushing or cheating, I suppose. You'll need to explore and gather components from 3 separate dungeons, a cavern complex that leads into a Velothi tomb, an ebony mine, and a secretive compound of underground ruins, retrieving something from each to be used in a teleporter to take you to Wizard Island, which, as it turns out, is what your friend the wizard was experimenting on. He was trying to get to Wizard Island and Wintervale for whatever reason, and of course, now that he's dead, you're going to have to take his place. And it should be mentioned that these intro dungeons aren't particularly difficult, but the content on Wizard Island itself is geared towards characters that are level 20 or above, so just keep that in mind. And eventually, when you're ready, you can activate the teleporter, which will transport you to a mystical realm full of particle effects, as you're gradually teleported to Wizard's Island. And, it has to be mentioned that Wizard's Island has a really, high production value. There's a lot of cinematic moments in this mod that provide you with an epic sense of action and scale. But anyway, you'll eventually arrive outside the gates of Wintervale, and pretty much immediately collapse from exhaustion, and you'll wake up a little while later in a medical station outside the city of Wintervale, where a nurse is attending to you. There's quite a bit of dialogue here that serves as a bit of an introduction to the main content of this mod, and eventually you'll get to leave and head into the city proper. It has to be mentioned that Wizard's Island is a very narrative-driven mod, with tens of thousands of words of dialogue, journals, and quest documents to be read, with nearly every character you meet having at least a bit of unique dialogue to, talk about. We'll see a bit more of that later on, but first we're going to be taking a tour of Wintervale, one of the largest cities and the place you get to, sort out at on Wizard Island. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice is that there is no levitation on Wizard Island. You can only walk or run through the environments here, hence why we'll be doing this tour largely on foot. This also means the environment is a bit more, I would say, linear-based than those you'd find on Wintervale. There's wide and open areas to be sure, but there's also a lot of areas that have designated paths, which are the only ones that you can, travel through. And in any event, here we are coming into the city proper, and if one thing's absolutely for sure, Wizard Island is an extremely atmospheric mod, fully taking advantage of the winter landscape and winter weather to provide a very scenic and, beautiful looking winter wonderland city that ideally suits the name of Wintervale. The city is also quite large, with probably close to 60 or 70 buildings in total, including a large outskirts of residential neighborhoods where most of the, commoners and middle class live in small, snow-covered cottages. And you also notice a lot of defensive fortifications with towers, walls, and palisades towards the border of town. And there's a bit of a reason for this. Not all is, exactly well in Wintervale. And there's a lot of strange goings on, as we'll, eventually find out through an extensive chain of quests. But anyway, moving on, as I said earlier, there's a fair bit of linear design being used in Wizard's Island, and this is especially noticeable with the street design of Wintervale itself. While you sometimes do come across areas with multiple streets that you can explore, there's only really one way to access the downtown district, and usually only one way to get from one end of town to another. And either way, the design of the town itself is, quite beautiful, with again a lot of that winter snowy charm that's quite atmospheric. It snows pretty much all the time here, so you can expect a lot of this, same type of weather. And going on into the centre of town here, this is where you'll find most of the shops, taverns, guilds, barracks, and manors in Wintervale, along with, a crowded set of streets here in the middle of everything. We'll be taking a look at some of the interiors here in a bit, but you gotta appreciate a sort of sense of verticality that's achieved by all these taller buildings here in the centre of town, with these smaller and shorter residential districts, spanning outwards, and the taller cliffside dwellings above, which is another district we'll be looking at in a moment. Now, you may notice that I'm running into a few slight FPS issues here. Wintervale is a bit heavy on FPS, especially with all the snow coming down all the time. So that's something to keep in mind, especially if, you have a middle-of-the-road rig with the Morrowind graphics and sounds overhaul installed. Though given the constant snowfall, you actually don't really get to see much distant land on Wizard Island, one of the side effects of the atmospheric weather. So curiously enough, Wizard Island looks almost exactly the same today as it did when it first released way back around 2005. You can't really say that about a lot of other mods, especially with all the graphical replaces out there, but in the case of Wizard Island, it does remain mostly the same, visually speaking, which is, just kind of an interesting note to make here. And anyway, moving on, there's a few, fun little design features here, like a couple of buildings that are built up on, platforms surrounding these massive trees. This is one of the more iconic areas of Wintervale, and it's certainly a very cool and unique design choice. Terry Built actually did something similar to this back in the early days, but I think they may have, gotten rid of all that, and regardless, you can get some pretty good views from up here, and one of the last areas of the city we're going to be looking at today, at least before we move on to some of the interiors, side quests, and of course the main quest, is this little pot to the northern edge of town. Wintervale borders a bit of a forest around the northern gates, which is quite scenic, with a few buildings scattered between the tall and leafy trees here. And real quick, I did just want to take a short look at the last district of Wintervale, the Cathedral and Mages Guild district, which is located up here along the slopes of one of Wizards Island's numerous mountains. This area has one of the best views looking down on the rest of the city, and the primary landmark up here is the Cathedral itself, where the town's religious order gathers to try and find solutions to the recent disturbing attacks on the citizenry. And you'll probably recognise this cathedral model. It's been used in a lot of mods over the years, first appearing in, I believe, it was Valdean, which actually had some of the same modders working on it as worked on Wizards Islands. But subsequently, it was also used in dozens of other mods, such as Wizards Islands here, and the most notable feature of all this is those, beautiful stained glass windows. Though you may note the rest of the model is a bit dated by today's standards. Still, it's a pretty cool looking sight with these cathedral spires, poking out amidst the constant snowfall here. Anyway, moving on to the rest of the town here, namely taking a look at some of the interiors and side quests here. We're first going to, visit the town tavern, a sort of mixed drinking and brothel, sort of place where citizens come to get away from the cold and despair on the streets. And again, you'll note that nearly everyone has a ton of unique dialogue on a variety of town subjects. And if you're a fan of, reading and immersing yourself in a story like me, you'll find a lot to like here. Aside from the tavern, you'll also find well over a dozen shops in town, many of which sell new and unique items that you can't find anywhere else, such as new weapons, armors, and much more. You'll also find that many of the shopkeepers here, again, have some unique dialogue. There's a lot of politics and intrigue going on in town, and everyone has a personal opinion on the matter about, who's guilty and who's not. There's also a ton of side quests, like this fellow who offers to go hunting in the woods with you, and a lot of these quests are tied to different times of day, so you'll have to come back later on to do this one. And there's really a lot of cool and atmospheric locations to visit in the city, including a fairly sizable merchant's hall, where you'll find an underground tavern, and you can actually do a bunch of, little mini-quests here, getting drinks for the patrons if you so desire, and I don't know if there's really a reward for doing so, but it's something you can do in any event. There's also multiple barkeeps with a fair selection of drinks and food for you to purchase. And up around the upper levels of the merchant's hall, you'll find a ton of merchant vendors that sell everything from baked goods, such as pies, torts, and cookies, to merchants supplying common goods such as dishes, basic necessities, alchemy vendors, the occasional enchanted goods shop, and much more. And every interior and building in town is uniquely decorated and designed, with some, really cool locations that you get to visit. There's no copy and pasting of vanilla interiors here. Everything is unique and new, which is a big part of Wizards Island's content here. There's just so much to see and explore, you'll probably spend hours just, searching around Wintervale before ever venturing out of town into the wilderness. And next up, we're stopping by the alchemy shop, and it's worth pointing out that Wizards Island does come with a new playable race. As you can see, the shopkeep here looks a bit different from a normal Khajiit, really, and this mod actually includes a sort of winter-themed Khajiit race that's unique to Wizards Island, and this is also a playable race, so you can actually, start the game as one if you'd like. Now, there's a couple of other things that are worth mentioning, but for the most part, we'll be just, quickly going through them. First is that you'll find that the merchants of Wintervale are, far wealthier than their Morrowind's counterparts, often having about 10,000 or more gold to, barter with. And the second is that there is a Fighters Guild questline that you can, play through here. It's really one of the only guild questlines I know of in Wintervale, but we'll be skipping over it for the most part and focusing on the main quest instead. And anyway, I did just want to take a quick look at some of the common residences here in town, because again, they're all, uniquely decorated and finished, and many of the residents have quests for you to do. There's just a ton of side quests in this mod, and you should always keep an eye out and explore a bit, because you never know what you might stumble across, and they can be just a bit strange at times, like there's a quest that involves being teleported to a drug-induced nightmare realm, which is, a bit odd to say the least. But moving on, we're going to, switch over to the main quest here, and at first, this involves doing some work for the city of Wintervale, helping out with an undead invasion that seems to just occur nightly, with zombies terrorizing the populace. There's a few different quests that you can do right away for the mayor's office, and also the town's armed forces, such as, tracking down a deserter, and helping supply arrows to the guardsmen at the posts. And eventually this involves helping out with the defense of Wintervale by assisting the armed forces at the gates with a small incursion. And, something I just want to note here, Wizard Island has one of the best written stories I've seen in a quest mod. It's really superbly designed with lots of great atmospheric touches, and I'd actually rank it as one of the best quest mods from Morrowind. And, I would have included it in our top 10 quest mod list if not for the fact that it's, also very much a landmass mod. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the story and main quest for Wizard Island is one of the best made from Morrowind, and is certainly more than worth experiencing just for that alone, though there's certainly plenty of other reasons as well. And anyway, I know I'm gushing quite a bit here, but Wizard Island really is one of my all-time favourite mods, so I really do highly recommend it. But, going back to our showcase here, early on in the main quest, you'll be asked to, head to a local crypt, in order to see if that's where these zombies are coming from that terrorize the town every night. And this is actually a really big dungeon, probably at least an hour or two of content by itself right here, though I'm going to try and avoid showing off too much, so as, to avoid spoilers. And as you might expect, the crypts here are quite dark, lending to the sort of spooky atmosphere that you might expect from crawling through, people's graves and all that. And naturally, you'll also be dealing with a lot of undead down here as well, including zombies, ghosts, skeletons, and a number of other, odd tomb creatures, as you'll soon see for yourself. And the zombies in particular are a bit of a pain, since they have a paralysis spell they use a lot, so you might want to come prepared with, some cure paralysis potions on you. And the crypt here is quite large, spanning several interiors, each composed of corridor upon corridor of deep darkness, where it's pretty much impossible to see far beyond the glare of your torch's flames, with the occasional small chamber room filled with the undead, and many horrific and grisly scenes awaiting you. The mayor's office has sent in a few parties of guards before you, and none have returned, and you'll find the evidence of their fate scattered around the crypt chambers here, where the undead made really short work of them. You may even come across some of the previous guards still alive though down here, isolated and alone, but these are no friends. They quickly become possessed by the spirits haunting this place and will shortly attack you, almost as soon as you arrive, and unfortunately for these poor souls, there's naught you can do but, put them out of their misery. And there's also several boss battles that you'll have to face as you delve through the crypts here. These are tougher fights than the normal undead that you'll encounter in the corridors, and again, it has to be said that you should really be above level 20 before you start playing this mod, because these fights can be pretty difficult, at least some of the time anyway. And either way, you'll need to defeat these bosses to get the keys down to the lower levels of the crypts, where of course yet more foes await you in the depths below. And there's a lot of rather unique new types of enemies that you'll face in these dungeons, unlike anything found on Wintervale. But we're going to leave off on exploring this dungeon here, so as to not spoil the whole thing. There's a lot of fairly large dungeons like this on Wizard's Island, all of them unique and atmospherically built with new hostile opponents that you'll have to face and dark secrets within. And the dungeon delving is definitely one of the highlights here and a large part of the storytelling of Wizard's Island. But we're going to be, moving on to the rest of the showcase here. And I want to provide a bit of a tour of some of the landscapes and environments that you can expect to find here on Wizard's Island. It's a pretty large landmass, but it can also be a bit forlorn at times, which is actually a deliberate design, I believe. This is meant to be a cold and uninviting place after all. There's still quite a few interesting locations to visit across the landscape here, including 2 taverns that provide a nice warm refuge away from the cold for travellers, as well as another city on the other side of the island. But we actually won't be showcasing that here because it's kind of tied into the main quest, and I want to avoid spoilers as much as possible. And, really, you should, play this mod for yourself, because as I keep saying, this mod is really fantastic and is, in my mind, an absolute must-play. And the terrain of Wizard's Island is a combination of giant winter forests, snowy tundras, and lots of tall and imposing mountain ranges. And much of this landscape is inhabited by hostile and dangerous creatures, From Yeti-like beasts to flying vermin that'll try and attack your every move, to dangerous worm creatures that, burst out of the ground to attack you. And surprisingly, there's even a set of ancient and decaying Duma ruins on the island, providing one of the mini dungeons that you'll get to explore in time, though it's guarded by many strange Duma devices and other nightmare beasts that'll prevent you from, just waltzing in. And as I've said before, Wizard's Island is a pretty big place, even more so due to the never-ending snow limiting visibility and the lack of levitation here. It's pretty easy to get lost out here in the wilderness, especially out in these big open forests and valleys. But there's also plenty of cool and scenic places for you to, find out here as well. And one of the last locations we're going to be looking at in this showcase is a giant castle that dominates the area outside of Wintervale. And this is one of the more iconic dungeons found in Wizard's Island that, you see in all the promotional trailers and screenshots, and with good reason. It's a pretty epic and dramatic place to visit, sitting atop a couple of the mountains here towards the middle of the island. And I'm going to be doing a quick flyover tour, but again, we'll be skipping over the actual interiors and dungeon delving portion here in order to, avoid spoilers, because this is a dungeon best explored on your own. And this is just one of the many epic locations that you'll visit during the Wizard's Island main quest. And normally, it's absolutely covered in goblins and flying minions that'll harass and attack you. And the actual dungeon itself also comes with a wide array of traps and, some really cool mysteries to explore. But you'll have to, find all that for yourself as we reach the end of our little showcase here. Now, I do hope you found this video interesting, and trust me when I say we've barely covered a fraction of the content in Wizard's Island. You'll have to play through this mod yourself in order to see all the amazing things there are to discover here, from epic dungeons to plentiful quests, excellent storytelling, and so much great music to listen to. Again, I really can't recommend this mod enough. You absolutely should, play it. This is one of the biggest and best mods made for Morrowind, and you're missing out if you don't at least give it a try. And anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week with another episode of Morrowind Modding Showcases.